community research webinar called Counting What Matters, where we're going to present the latest Statistics New Zealand report on the size, the scale, and the economic significance of the non-profit sector in New Zealand. So this is one of a series of community research webinars, a very awesome program of free of charge events, 30 to 60 minutes long, for you, time-poor, cash-strapped professionals working in the community and voluntary sector in New Zealand, where we link up community sector professionals. We share expertise online about what's working in the community sector so that you're better able to set strategies based on evidence of what's working. You're better able to make improvements in your work. You can become more evidence-based in your work, and hopefully as well so that we provide you with hope and encouragement and a tautoko for your work. So sharpen your pencils, everybody. Pay attention at the back, because we're about to have a presentation from two very clever middle-aged men talking about statistics. Nobody said this was the entertainment channel. Just published 2 weeks ago by Statistics New Zealand is the 2016 report on non-profit institutions in New Zealand as they looked in 2013. It's a long-awaited study, so we've waited 10 years. If you're like me, for some years now you've been quoting the statistics that we knew from 2004, where for the first time we were able to report with confidence that yes, we were an industry, we were a sector, we are a sector. We were able to tell people that we were larger than the construction industry. Since then, we've had a major earthquake. We've heard of deregulations taking place within the charitable sector. And there's been an economic downturn, so we haven't known what the story was. How does the story look for our sector now in 2016 as we look at the 2013 study? So we have a team of people supporting this webinar from around the country. I'll introduce them to you later. Later on, I'm going to introduce you as well to some resources that are available on the community research website, including copies of the Statistics New Zealand reports. And shortly, I'm going to introduce you to Ian McLeod. So today's event will be presented by Ian McLeod of Statistics New Zealand. Ian has a long and deep history of studying the economic significance of industries in New Zealand. And Garth Nowland-Foreman of the Centre for Non-Profit Leadership. Garth was a member of the advisory group for this report. He's a former senior lecturer with Unitec, and he's a board member of Community Research. So I'll shortly be handing over to Ian down in Christchurch, but now we're going to play you a short video. Welcome to Counting What Matters, a community research webinar. Today's event will be hosted by me, Jan Hind, and it will be presented by Ian McLeod and Garth Nowland-Foreman. And here's our agenda. This will be a 30-minute event. So if you'd like to engage with us and put your questions to the presenters, now's the time to interact. We'd like you to send us your questions. Throughout the webinar, Garth and Ian will respond to your questions as they go along. So there are 3 ways that you can ask a question. You can use your Q&A function on Hangouts. So remember, you have to be logged into Google Plus to see this feature. It's in the top right-hand corner. Click on the Rubik's Cube, select the blue Q&A, and simply ask a question. Or you can tweet us, #GoodResearch or @GoodResearch. Or you can ask Jan by texting us on 022 419 4304. So after today's session, the webinar will be recorded. You'll be able to view it in just a few days' time on YouTube, and we'll send you a link. We're also going to send you a short survey, and we really appreciate your feedback, so we hope you'll take a few minutes on that. For now, grab a cuppa, make some popcorn. Remember, you can't break anything. Test your controls and get used to your Hangout experience. And this is a live event, so it's normal to expect some delays, especially in the handover between presenters. That usually takes a couple of seconds. However, if you're experiencing any lags, if you're experiencing any buffering of the sound, or any lag between your visuals and your sound, then the chances are that the problem is at your end, and it will be to do with a slow connection, it'll be to do with your bandwidth, or something to do with your device. So do expect some delays. Thanks to the Kaitiaki of Community Research. If you enjoyed today's event, sign up at www.communityresearch.org.nz to receive our e-news. And we're also going to send you information about our next webinar, which will be presented by Nan Wehipehana, and it will be a framework for Indigenous evaluation, so that's certainly one not to be missed. Meanwhile, thanks for joining us today. I'm going to hand you over to and introduce Ian McLeod of Statistics New Zealand. Ian joins us from Christchurch today, and you've had very deep involvement on this project. Ian, tell us, what does the non-profit satellite account study for 2013 tell us?
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to present today. Just before we start, however, I'd like to just acknowledge the work of early on Lindsay Beck and Kyla Rata, but more particularly recently the work of Vicky Ward, Ting Yu Shi and Chase O'Brien. Without those guys there wouldn't be a satellite account. And I want to just publicly thank the members of the advisory group, Garth Nowland-Foreman, Diana Suggett, Tu Williams and Dave Henderson, who provided advice, support and encouragement right throughout the project. So thank you. The latest statistics present the second study into the operation of non-profits in New Zealand. The first one was in 2004, so it's been pretty much a decade in between studies. And while we've got some summary information for 2010 in our published tables, the real focus of the study is on 2013. And I guess I should really give some indication of what we mean when we say non-profit satellite account. Essentially what it is a supplement to the existing New Zealand system of national accounts, and it analyses non-profits' contribution to the economy expressed in a number of ways really, but particularly expressed in terms of gross domestic product or GDP. It does, however, go a step further than that, and it includes measures of volunteering and unpaid work, and we'll come back to those a bit later on when we wrap up. So when we started to compile the satellite account for non-profits, we talked about our expectations as a team, and I have to admit that I thought the contribution of non-profits would be less in 2013 compared to 2004. After all, we've seen significant growth in some parts of the economy, the services industries, including tourism and dairying, just a couple of examples. And I thought because the sector comprises so many small organisations that it wouldn't keep pace with that growth. So I was a little bit surprised when this happened. Income up 65%, expenditure up even more, 68%, but more importantly, from an economic point of view that is, the contribution that NPIs make to the economy as measured by GDP has increased, not dropped. In 2004, NPIs contributed 2.5% to New Zealand's GDP, and by 2013 it had risen to 2.7%. And I guess that means a lot of things, but two things I will mention would be that it indicates that the sector is large, increasing in size, and it remains larger than a number of industries in New Zealand. The other thing that it indicates is that it is involved in delivering a very, very wide range of services, and the demand for those services is as strong as ever. And we've seen, I guess, underpinning that demand, an increase in the numbers of NPIs from 97,000 in 2004 to over 114,000 in 2013. So it lacks, as a sector, really large institutions, but it makes up for that in terms of numbers. But I think, though, really what makes the sector unique is the way in which it generates its income in order to provide those services. And it's true, yes, that most of the income comes from sales of goods and services, but a very large proportion, over 20% in fact, comes from philanthropic sources, the largest of which being households. In this little table here, what we're seeing is that in terms of expenditure, in that bottom panel, the relativities between the main expenditure items, particularly purchases and payment for employment, payments to employees, are pretty much the same, but from 2004 to 2013. So what NPIs spend their money on hasn't necessarily changed too much. However, where they get their money from has changed. So sales is an increasing proportion of total income, and that's, I guess, to an extent overshadowing the fact that money from what we would call transfer income, money from grants, donations, bequests, subscriptions, those sorts of things, is making up a lower proportion of total income, even though it has increased quite a lot. Household donations, philanthropic organisations now provide a lower proportion of income from that source. So, getting towards the end now, I'd like just to finish up, as promised, with a word about paid and unpaid employment. I mentioned the importance of households to the sector, who remain the largest donators, if you like. But households actually contribute in three ways. Through the cash that they give to NPIs, donations, bequests, subscriptions, and so on. Through paid employment in the sector, but most importantly of all, through the voluntary labour that private individuals provide. And so it's clear that services are provided mainly by volunteer labour in the non-profit sector. In fact, volunteer labour is crucial to the ongoing operations of NPIs, and only 10% of non-profits actually employ paid staff. And that's exactly the same percentage as in 2004. However, employment has increased. Of those 10% of organisations that do employ paid staff, their employment count has gone up by about 30%. And over the same period, almost a decade, the number of volunteers has increased, but the time that they are able to provide to non-profits has fallen significantly. That's measured according to our Statistics New Zealand time use survey, and that's used as the basis for our volunteering estimates that extend the boundary of the satellite account. And just to finish, just to reiterate the employment theme, this is a table. It just shows that of the 10% of NPIs that do employ, by far the vast majority employ less than 20 staff, and in fact most employ fewer than 6. So when you combine all these factors that I've talked about, I think it's clear that the sector is large, it's quite unique in many respects, and it touches, because of the very wide range of services it provides, it touches nearly every part of community life in New Zealand. So I'll just wrap it up there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ian. So we have a few questions coming through already. Please keep asking your questions and we'll relay them to the presenters. Ian, first off, burning question coming through from a number of people, 97,000 to 115,000. Who are they all? What can you tell us about this growth, and who are the organisations that have emerged into our sector in the last 10 years?
Okay, well, before I get to the details, there's probably something that I need to indicate, that for the latest study we have been able to enumerate the population rather better than in 2004. So we're not necessarily always comparing apples with apples because we have better data this time. However, I think the underlying statistics remain consistent, and the top 4 activity groups by number are culture and recreation, and that's by far the largest by number, followed by social services, development and housing, and religion. And the development and housing and religion groups have actually swapped. In 2004, religion was 3rd by number, and development and housing was 4th. But because We've had better enumeration of tangata whenua governance organisations this time. We've got quite a few more units in that activity group. But if you want to rank by GDP, that's a different story. Social services is first. Culture and recreation comes second, followed by education and research, and then the health activity group. And that shouldn't really be a surprise that those groups are where employment tends to be concentrated.
So Ian, just going back on now, because we hear a lot about words like duplication are used of our sector, and that's a word that needs to be used with caution, obviously. You said that the greatest growth comes from those groups who are working in recreational fields. What's your view on what we might understand from that analysis?
Well, when we draw the population, it's probably the biggest part of the entire project, really, trying to come up with population numbers and classify them to activities. And there's lots of difficulties in doing that. But probably we've seen quite a lot of growth of sporting non-profits.
What's that about?
Well, I guess it could be because of programs to encourage participation in recreation. We might be seeing we are seeing quite a growth in the non-sporting, the culture and other recreation areas as people perhaps become interested in their heritage and so on. So yeah, that's about it there.
Thank you, and we're still open to your questions coming in. I just wanted to ask one more thing, Ian. You mentioned before that we're larger than certain industries. Can you give us more on that?
Yes, as a group, the NPI sector is larger than a number of the services industries. It's larger than mining, fishing, and I probably have to go back and check, Jan, but it may still contribute more to GDP than the construction industry. I'd need to check that out.
That'd be really helpful to know. And Ian, also we'll stay online at the end of the webinar to see if people have further questions, and we can always revert as well with more information because we will be following up with the link to the recording of this event and further resources for our audience. So shortly I'm going to hand over to Garth Nowland-Foreman to give us his take on what's going on. Garth will use his prophetic skills and gaze into a crystal ball for us and to give us a sense of what we learn that's useful for us as non-profit sector professionals that we can take home and use in our day-to-day work. Certainly, Garth, it seems like we've seen some astonishing statistics here, a growth of 15%, growth of expenditure of 68% in the last 10 years, but also worryingly a growth in income of 65%. Sort of reminds me of going back to 2009 when, before the global financial crisis came along, we all thought we were really rich because everybody had a new car. But in hindsight, we realised we were just spending more and borrowing more. We're going to hand over to Garth shortly, but I will just say, don't forget you can text us. You can text me on 022-419-4304, and we'll be dropping that number into your feed. Hashtag good research. Is this good research? We want to know from you. At good research, drop us a line, and you'll also find us chatting to you on Facebook as well. So ask us a question in the Q&A feed. We're keen to keep the interaction going. Garth Nowland-Foreman, a member of the advisory group, what do we learn from all of this?
Thanks, Jan. Kia ora koutou. I think, first of all, I want to say thank you to Statistics New Zealand and express my appreciation for this collection. It's very important that we know more about this crucial part of our society, as Ian has already indicated. And as is mentioned, this is only the second time in our history that this kind of information has been collected. And unfortunately, 9 years between drinks is a bit too long to wait. GDP is updated every 3 months. We need to support Stats New Zealand to prioritise more regular collections, building it into their routine survey work so we can see more clearly what the trends are and where we're heading. With 2 collections under our belt, on a personal level, I'm hoping we get at least 3 points of comparison before I die. But some regular collections will make this data even more useful. I just want to focus on two things which have been already referred to. The first big message from these data are just how important the not-for-profit sector is, and I just want to really pause and underline that we clearly punch above our weight. Many were surprised when in 2004 we discovered 97,000 non-profits, and as Ian said, that has actually continued to grow, up 18%, now 114,000 non-profits, and a lot of that growth has come from just local community initiatives, people doing stuff together in communities, in sport, recreation, arts, culture, community groups, as well as some better collection of information about tangata whenua governance organisations. Paid jobs are up even more, 30% increase. There's now 137,000 full-time equivalent paid jobs in the sector, and when you include a notional valuing of the volunteers, then our value add to the GDP has leapt even faster and is up to 38%. So we're approaching the 10 billion point. So all those things show that our production and productivity is increasing at a truly impressive rate. Our contribution not only to society but to the economy as well. So if we just do some comparisons on the full-time equivalent workforce, the 137,000 paid jobs in the sector compare very well to other high-profile industries like manufacturing, tourism, construction. They swamp agriculture and forestry and mining, even before we add in the volunteers converted to full-time equivalent numbers. When you add that, the total workforce, paid and unpaid, is bigger than almost every other single industry sector in society. So we involve more people, paid and unpaid, in lots of activities across the community in lots of different ways, swamping just about every other industry by comparison. But the picture is more complex, and it's probably most clearly, the complexity is probably most clearly represented by what I'm calling the volunteer squeeze. While the number of people volunteering for non-profits is up 20% over the decade, and that's faster than the population growth, so it's a real increase, and now involves 1.3 million New Zealanders every month. On the other hand, the average hours they are working has been slashed in half. So if you convert the total volunteer hours worked to full-time equivalents, there's a massive 42% drop in volunteering hours since 2004. So in a number of other countries, there has been small decreases identified, but this level of basically the floor falling out of volunteer hours is pretty much unprecedented in other countries that we like to compare ourselves. And that's an important point because the sector is highly reliant on volunteers. And as we've heard, 90% of non-profits employ no paid staff, 100% volunteers. So with the time our volunteers being able to give being squeezed like this, and this unprecedented collapse in volunteering hours, it puts a real squeeze on the sector as a whole that I think we need to come up with more creative and innovative strategies to find our way forward. At the same time, non-profits have had to manage a pretty precarious balancing act of their finances. While there has been a dramatic 65% increase in income, over the same time, expenditure has increased by 68%. If those figures were around the other way, it would be less of a problem. But despite the massive increase in what might appear to be just a small gap, the gap is on the wrong side of the ledger. Now, regardless of how big your income is, if your expenditure is even bigger, sooner or later you end up in trouble. So it should be no surprise that in national accounts terminology, 7 of the 12 activity areas that Stats New Zealand report on in 2013 are dis-saving. That means eating into their reserves or needing to borrow to just get by. So 7 out of 12 of the activity areas. That compares to just 1 out of 12 activity areas in that position in 2004. when expenditure is greater than income, it can only mean that you have to eat into your reserves or go into debt, and neither of those are sustainable for the long term. So increasingly non-profits report being squeezed and under pressure at a time when government policy seems to be even more reliant on this increasingly precarious sector to fill the gaps. While government funding appears to have increased, a large part of this is probably due to better data collection. In 2013, basically in 2004, the Ministry of Health couldn't say in any detail how much government funding went to non-profits at that stage, so there was some fairly rough assumptions. So we've got much better data now in 2013. And we also know that funding from business and philanthropic trusts are both making proportionately less of a contribution. So this leaves non-profits more reliant on private donations and fees for service. So crucial part of society, but perhaps more precarious than we've ever been.
Thank you, Garth Nowland-Foreman. I'm looking at a picture there of somebody on the top of the Empire States Building balancing on 2 chairs. Why can I read my story into that? Hey, we've got a couple of questions coming through. And don't forget, hashtag good research. Text us, use your Q&A box. Ian, Scott wants to know, how were the volunteer hours costed, please?
Okay, volunteer hours. Okay, we used a number of things. We have used the 2010 Time Use Survey extensively. They provide us with a number of volunteers benchmark and a time spent volunteering. And we've used population census estimates to rate those numbers forward to 2013. We then have used wage rates aligned to the activity groups of the non-profit activity groups, and that multiplies the time spent and the numbers by a rate to get a value for volunteering.
So it's still probably an underestimate or a modest estimate, but it's much, much better than the 2004 estimate of costing.
In a moment, I'm going to take you to some resources on our website. And Scott, I'll show you where you can dig around and find out some of the tables of information contributing. And if you still have questions, come back to us as well. Ian Malcolm wants to know what things are being sold that we're seeing such an increase in other forms of income other than fundraising. So I'm guessing that that's around trading, the income from trading has increased. Can you tell us what's behind that?
Yes, it is predominantly trading income. We've seen increases in culture and recreation, for example, and I guess a lot of that would come through sports clubs, with bar operations and so on. We have other trading income from opportunity shops. They all sound small, but they all add up. There would be other trading income from various sources that probably experts in the sector would know more than I about. And I think they're probably in some of the health, education, social services areas, there can be part charges. There is a significant amount of contract income that comes from government, and then we have areas, we've got, I guess I should explain, the non-profit satellite account is not just about the non-profits that serve households. There are other non-profits from other parts of the economy that meet our criteria for inclusion. There's business and professional associations, for example, and they charge for their services. So all those things taken together add up to that income from sales of goods and services.
Thanks, Ian.
And I think it's fair to say that, especially in the social services, health and education field, a big chunk of that fee for service is government contracts. So whenever it's a contestable contract, it's considered a fee for service. But Non-profits have always been entrepreneurial, so the sudden discovery of social entrepreneurs is really discovering that something's been around for a long time in our sector.
And I notice as well it's a significant statistics that 20% of our income is still coming from domestic, so that's people giving donations to us, and that's a really important source of our income. I'm going to come back to you, to both of you. We want to keep this. We want to wrap up promptly because we know that many of our viewers are watching at their desks and brown bagging it, so to speak. And so we want to keep to time. I'm going to quickly show people some resources if they do want to find out more, and then I'm going to come back to both of you, Garth and Ian, just to get close, to wrap up really, and tell us what should we say about all of this? What's our take on this? Is this good growth? Are we healthy? How should we describe ourselves in terms of the shift from 10 years ago and also our economic significance now? Whilst I'm giving you a moment to scratch your heads on that one, let me take you to some resources on the very awesome community research website. This will take a couple of seconds to show up, and I'm looking for a thumbs up from one of my colleagues here just to confirm that we can see it. We're looking first of all at a new collection on the community research website. The importance of New Zealand non-profits. Collected here is research on the importance of non-profits and their value in Aotearoa, New Zealand. If you scroll down, you'll see the 2016 study, including some tables of statistics which support it, and a great infographic, some great infographics here for Scott for volunteering, which give us a little bit more of the background behind the thinking, the study. Some 2004 resources from Statistics New Zealand, so we're seeing a compilation here, and also some counting for non-profits back in 2004, 2015, and I believe that there was a distinct partnership there with OCBS. There were studies prepared that drew on Statistics New Zealand's reports there and gave a sense of what our sector was looking like. So everything here on the community research website is free of charge for you to download and to use in your work, because we're interested in offering great resources for time-poor, cash-strapped community sector professionals to get you better equipped to be doing your work. On that note, if you're interested in what we've been discussing today and you want to know more about how we advocate for our value as a sector, you may be interested in an upcoming webinar called Outcomes Plus. Trevor McGlinchey will be presenting some research and giving us his understanding of the added value that the community sector brings and really preparing us for a phase of tendering and contracting to government that we're increasingly moving into now, how we talk about our value as a sector. Our next webinar will be presented, as you know, by Nan Wehipehana, A Vision for Indigenous Evaluation. She's going to give us a framework on sort of the cultural paradigms framework, evaluating by Maori, evaluating for Maori, and evaluating as Maori. That promises to be a really wonderful webinar. We hope you'll sign up for that. And also, for those of you who are swimming in data and needing to provide narratives, needing to be able to talk about your effectiveness in terms of your stories, Moya Sayer-Jones will be presenting another free 60-minute webinar about complex projects and short stories. And all of these events are presented by sector experts, where you get to hear from people who are working on the ground, kind of cold-face practitioners, grassroots community experts, so that your learning is better informed. Good, now that's enough from me. I'm going to hand back to Ian and Garth and ask you to give us your final take. How are we doing?
Me first? Okay. Well, I think as a sector, from an economic point of view, non-profits are doing well. They've increased their share of GDP, but GDP is well known not to be a measure of welfare, so it doesn't give the whole picture. And the sorts of things that Garth has alluded to need to be heeded. And really, perhaps a closing comment from me would just be that perhaps I'd hope that people take away from this webinar an appreciation of the size of the not-for-profit sector and the contribution it makes, not just to the communities it serves, but to the economy in general. It's very significant.
Over to you, Garth.
Okay. Well, I echo Ian's thoughts there. I think I'd sum it up as more crucial than ever, but at risk of being more precarious than ever as well. And I think particularly that 42% drop in the total time that volunteers are contributing to our sector is quite significant. And if I could just say one more thing about that, I tested that to see whether it was related to, you know, these youngsters not pulling their own weight like us older people have been. But in fact, the drop is exactly the same across the broad age groups. So it's not focused in any one particular age group. And in fact, the adults and older people are reducing their hours of volunteering just as much as the young people. And I think this presents a big challenge for our sector because we need to look at new ways of engaging people that can make the most of people who are under much more time pressures today than they've perhaps ever been.
And that's a great closing comment, thank you. I began this webinar by telling you that we were supported by a fantastic team all around the country. I'm going to ask my colleagues just to quickly take their cameras up so we can all give you a wave and say goodbye. This is where you wish you put your makeup on. Lassa and Portala from tangatawhenua.com, based over in Rotorua, have been managing the chat feed and have been interacting with you online. David Blair, our technical producer, and Sarah Herbert and Kay Marie Dunn with me here in Wellington. Would you like to take up your cameras so we can just say goodbye to our audience? David, we can't see you. David didn't put his makeup on today. Thanks everybody for joining us. We'll hope we'll see you again online. Give us your feedback. If there are burning questions that you're grappling with, we'd like to know what they are, because we're always looking to program new webinars in response to your needs. So thanks for joining us, and we hope we'll see you online soon. Kia ora koutou.